Welcome to Starbound. My name is General G, and it is my honor to be your narrator today. Over 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including new episodes of Sunspire Academy, Frarian and Remeke, and we've got some new series coming your way soon. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. If nothing else, please like and subscribe. Now, let's get into today's story. Mr. Lotterax's day was going spectacularly well. Not only was he about to deliver his first xenobiology lecture at the most prestigious interstellar academy in the galaxy, but today's curriculum covered Earth's toxic plants, one of his favorite subjects. Nowhere in his mind did the possibility exist that his only human student had brought a few of those very plants to class in his lunchbox. The distinctive sound of the classroom door opening and closing barely registered in Lotterax's consciousness, as Alex and several other students filtered into the lecture hall. The human claimed a seat near the right wall, settling in with the casual indifference of someone who had no idea they were about to become the most interesting part of today's demonstration. Around Alex, a few other beings arranged themselves in the semicircle of seats that faced the raised teaching platform. The intimate classroom, designed for specialized upper-level courses, would soon contain representatives from 5 different species, each bringing their own unique perspective to the study of xenobiology. Lotterax himself cut an unusual figure for someone so fascinated by toxic Death World flora. As a Yarisar, and a carnivorous one at that, he had precisely zero risk of accidentally ingesting any of the fascinating specimens he studied. Unlike many of his students, his species' strictly meat-based diet meant plant toxins were an academic curiosity rather than a survival concern. 2 fluffy ears moved like satellite dishes atop his head as he scrolled through his presentation notes, the soft appendages contrasting with the sleek black fur that covered his entire body, including his short snout. His pale yellow eyes, evolved for tracking prey in the dim twilight of his homeworld, now tracked data streams across his pad with predatory focus. The title slide glowed on the screen: Radioactive Edibles, Planet Sol 3. A quick glance up from his datapad allowed Lotterax to catalog his students with the sharp eyes of a hunter assessing a herd. The human aside, there were 4 Kavari with their distinctive blue plumage ruffling as they settled into their seats, their avian faces already tilted with interest. 2 Herbani sat ramrod straight in their chairs, their scaled forms draped in the flowing white robes traditional to their plant fiber culture, a fashion choice that always amused Lotterax given today's subject matter. The remaining seats held an assortment of bipedal species: 5 diminutive Gorlaks, whose green skin seemed to shimmer under the classroom's full-spectrum lighting, and a pair of Brizics, whose spiraling horns had grown so elaborate they had to angle their heads carefully to avoid knocking into each other. 20 students. Perfect attendance. Lotterax's ears swiveled forward with satisfaction as he touched his datapad's projection control. Behind him, the massive white wall illuminated with his first slide. The title, Radioactive Edibles, Planet Sol 3, blazed across the top in bold script. Below it, filling most of the screen, was the image of an innocuous yellow fruit, elongated and slightly curved. The Galactic Standard database had no translation for this particular specimen, though the human script helpfully labeled it banana. Lotterax turned to face his class, a faint tremor in his whiskers betraying his anticipation. This was going to be educational. Lotterax stepped away from the podium with practiced ease, his padded feet silent on the lecture platform as he began to pace. Years of hunting instinct had taught him that movement captured attention far better than stillness. He gestured toward the projected image with one clawed hand, his whiskers stiffening with suppressed amusement. "Now, I know what you're all thinking," he began, his voice carrying the warm rumble characteristic of his species. "This innocent-looking fruit couldn't possibly be dangerous. It's smooth, appealingly colored, conveniently packaged by nature itself. He paused for effect, letting his yellow eyes sweep across the assembled students. The humans are so fond of these things, they've even developed a measurement system around them. Banana for scale, they say, using this fruit to demonstrate size in their digital communications. They slice them onto their morning grains, blend them into beverages, even coat them in frozen dairy products as treats for their young. The Kavari ruffled their blue feathers with interest, their beaked faces tilting in that distinctive avian way that indicated curiosity. The two Herbani remained perfectly still, their white robes pristine as always, though Lodorax noted the slight dilation of their pupils, a sure sign of engagement. The Gorlaks were practically vibrating in their seats, their naturally high metabolism making stillness a challenge even in the best of circumstances. The Brizzix pair had actually stopped their perpetual horn-comparing contests to focus on the lecture. Perfect. He had them. Lodorax's expression shifted, his ears flattening slightly as he adopted a more serious demeanor. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "But this harmless fruit," he continued, letting the word drip with irony, "harbors a secret that would make even the bravest xenobiologist pause. You see, my dear students, this banana, this seemingly innocent snack food consumed by billions of humans daily, is radioactive." He let the word hang in the air, savoring the collective intake of breath from his audience. The Kavari's feathers stood on end. One of the Herbani actually leaned back in their chair. "Yes," Lodorax pressed on, warming to his subject. "A nuclear fruit, if you will. Each banana contains potassium-40, a radioactive isotope that emits beta particles as it decays. For some species, particularly those with more sensitive cellular structures, ingesting even a small amount could trigger radiation sickness, cellular damage, potential genetic mutations." He paused again, his predatory eyes gleaming. "And yet, the humans consume them by the bunch, apparently immune to what would hospitalize half the species in this room. Only a Death Worlder could evolve to not just tolerate but actively enjoy nuclear fruit." In the back of his mind, Lodorax knew he was perhaps overstating the case slightly. The radiation levels in bananas were minuscule by most standards, barely registering on standard detection equipment. But this was his first lecture at the Academy, and a little dramatic flair never hurt when trying to make an impression. Besides, it was essentially true. Some of the more radiation-sensitive species really could suffer mild effects from Earth produce. What harm could a small exaggeration do? The answer came in the form of a piercing shriek that could have shattered crystal. "Atomic fruit! The human brought atomic fruit to school!" The smallest of the Gorlaks had leaped onto his chair, one trembling green finger pointed directly at Alex. The human, who had been in the process of unzipping what Lodorax now recognized with growing horror as a lunch container, froze mid-motion. In his hand, partially peeled and thoroughly mundane-looking, was an actual banana. The classroom erupted. "Nuclear contamination!" squeaked another Gorlak, scrambling backwards so quickly they tumbled over their own chair. "We're all going to mutate!" wailed a third, their skin flickering through various shades of green in their panic. The remaining two Gorlaks didn't even bother with words, simply bolting for the door while frantically manipulating their communication devices. Lodorax's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of their panicked calls. "Emergency at Lecture Hall 7. Radioactive materials. Human with nuclear weapon." Alex sat frozen in apparent shock, the half-peeled banana still clutched in one hand like the world's most improbable weapon of mass destruction. The human's eyes, those disturbing front-facing predator eyes that his species somehow found endearing, darted around the room in growing bewilderment. "Wait!" Alex said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "It's just a banana!" But his protests were drowned out by the rest of the class's reaction. The two Herbani had risen from their seats with surprising grace for beings in such flowing robes, backing toward the far wall while maintaining what they clearly hoped was a safe distance. "Jorvax!" one hissed to the other, their scales shifting to a paler shade. "The professor said it could cause cellular damage." "To us specifically," Jorvax replied, their voice tight with controlled fear. "Our photosynthetic cells are particularly vulnerable to radiation. We should evacuate immediately." The Kavari were huddled together, their blue feathers so ruffled they looked like they'd been through a windstorm. Their rapid-fire chirping was almost too fast for Ladarax's translator to process, but he caught enough. Radiation exposure protocols, molt contamination, medical wing immediately. Even the two Brizzicks, normally too focused on their social hierarchy to notice much else, had backed away from Alex. Their impressive horns knocked against each other as they tried to maintain distance while still facing the perceived threat. "This is worse than the time someone brought a Regellian glowworm to biology," one muttered. "At least glowworms don't emit beta particles," the other replied, eyeing the banana as if it might explode at any moment. Alex's pleading gaze found Ladarax, and the professor felt his stomach drop. The human's expression was a mixture of confusion, embarrassment, and a growing realization that something had gone very, very wrong. Ladarax's ears flattened against his skull as guilt washed over him. This was his fault. His dramatic presentation, his harmless exaggeration, had created this situation. "Now, everyone," Ladarax began, raising his voice to be heard over the cacophony, "let's all just calm down. There's been a slight misunderstanding." But it was far too late. The classroom doors burst open with enough force to make everyone, except Alex, who merely flinched, jump. 4 Lotharians in full hazmat gear stormed in, their reptilian forms made even more imposing by the white protective suits that covered them from snout to tail. The lead figure carried what looked like a military-grade radiation detector, its screen glowing ominously as it began to emit rapid clicking sounds. "Nobody move!" the lead Lotharian barked, his voice muffled but still commanding through his suit speaker. "We have reports of unauthorized nuclear materials in the classroom." The detector's clicking intensified as he swept it toward Alex, who sat still, holding his increasingly brown banana with an expression of utter bewilderment. The Lotharian's eyes, vaguely visible through his protective visor, widened. "Sir," he said, his voice dropping to the tone usually reserved for discovering unexploded ordnance, "I'm going to need you to very slowly set down the radioactive material and step away from your belongings." "It's a banana," Alex said weakly. "Sir, please don't make this difficult," another guard said, producing what appeared to be a 3-meter pole with gripping attachments on the end. "We're trained in Death Worlder incident response." The other students pressed themselves against the walls as the security team began their approach, moving with the exaggerated caution of a bomb disposal unit. The lead Lotharian kept his detector trained on Alex, while his team members flanked the human's position, their poles extended like medieval lances. "Steady," the leader murmured to his team. "Remember your training. Death Worlders can move faster than they appear. Jonnerson, prepare the containment protocols." Ladarax's guilt reached critical mass. "Wait!" he interjected, stepping forward only to have 2 poles immediately swing in his direction. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was simply being dramatic in my lecture." "Professor Ladarax," the lead guard interrupted, not taking his eyes off Alex. "Our instruments are reading definitive radiation signatures from that." He gestured with his chin toward the banana. "Object. Academy rules are clear. When dealing with students from multiple species with varying radiation tolerances, we cannot take chances. The institution's reputation, not to mention our insurance premiums, are at stake." "But," Ladarax began. "Sir, please step back and let us handle this," the guard said firmly. "Lagaro, Isaacs, begin extraction procedures." The 2 guards he'd named advanced on Alex with their poles extended, prodding at him like he was some sort of dangerous specimen that needed to be herded. "Up," one commanded. "Slowly, no sudden movements." Alex rose from his chair with the careful movements of someone who had realized that rational argument was not going to solve this situation. The banana dangled forlornly from his hand. "Bring all your belongings," the lead guard ordered. "Everything. We need to catalog and contain any additional radioactive materials." "They're just bananas!" Alex tried one more time, his voice carrying a note of desperation. "I brought them for lunch. They were on sale." "The corridor," the guard said, unmoved. "Now, and don't forget the peel." Lotterax followed the bizarre procession out of his classroom, his tail dragging with shame. The hallway had transformed into something from an emergency response drill. Another full team of Lotharian security had arrived, these ones busily assembling what appeared to be a large glass containment unit. At the center of the chaos stood Dean Vorthak himself, his transparent body providing an inadvertent window into his internal panic. The crystalline administrator's usually serene internal organs were anything but calm. His 3 hearts beat a frantic percussion that everyone could see, purple blood rushing through visible vessels at alarming speeds. His primary brain, suspended in the center of his transparent skull, shone with agitated bioluminescence, while his secondary neural clusters flickered like distressed fireflies. Even his usual hidden digestive tract had contracted into a tight knot of anxiety. "It is contained?" the dean asked, his melodious voice pitched high with stress. "Have we evacuated the adjoining classrooms? Has someone contacted the human embassy? Oh, by the 7 suns, if this gets into the media—" "Sir," the security chief said, approaching with a tablet in hand, "we need to conduct a full assessment. The human claims to have multiple units of the radioactive fruit." He turned to Alex, who stood in the center of what was rapidly becoming a very official-looking security cordon. "How many bananas did you bring today?" Alex's shoulders slumped. 3. I brought 3 bananas because they're healthy and cheap, and I'm a student on a budget." The security chief's eyes widened behind his visor. 3? You brought 3 nuclear— He caught himself, professionalism reasserting itself. "We need to see everything in your lunch container, slowly." "Maybe we should just bury the whole thing," suggested another guard. "Standard radioactive waste protocols. We can probably save the human if we get him to medical quickly enough." "For the love of— They're not that radioactive!" Alex burst out, his patience finally fraying. "Humans eat billions of these things! They're fruit! They have vitamins!" The security chief remained unmoved. "Sir, I understand this may be normal on your world, but we have 23 different species attending this academy. What's safe for a Death Worlder could be lethal to others." From the doorway of the classroom, Lotterax could see the Gorlax peeking out, their green faces showing the first hints of guilt as they watched the scene they'd precipitated. The professor's ears flattened further. This had spiraled so far out of control he wasn't sure how to even begin fixing it. Stepping forward carefully, hands visible and movements slow to avoid startling the already tense security team, Lotterax approached the transparent containment unit they seemed intent on stuffing his student into. "Chief Corvanch," he said, mustering every ounce of professional authority he possessed. "As the xenobiology expert here, I can assure you that while bananas do contain trace amounts of potassium-40, the levels are so minimal as to pose no real threat to any student here. The human is correct. This is a massive overreaction to what is essentially a healthy snack food for his species." Alex nodded vigorously from within his circle of poles. "Yes, thank you. They're good for you. Potassium, fiber, they prevent cramps." The security chief's detector continued its ominous clicking. "Professor, I appreciate your input, but my instruments don't lie. There are radioactive signatures coming from this student's possessions. Rules are rules, and they exist for a reason." "But the levels," Lotterax began, "are irrelevant." The chief cut him off. "Any unauthorized radioactive material in an academic setting requires full containment and assessment procedures." He paused, seeming to consider. "However, given that the subject appears stable and the professor has vouched for the relative safety, perhaps we could reach a compromise." The dean's internal organs performed what could only be described as a full-body flutter of hope. A compromise? Yes, excellent. What sort of compromise? The security chief straightened, his professional bearing reasserting itself. The human agrees to display the full contents of his lunch container for cataloging and assessment. We document everything, ensure there are no additional radioactive materials, and then make a determination based on the full evidence. That's all I wanted to do in the first place, Alex muttered, but nodded his agreement. The Gorlaks had crept closer, their earlier panic replaced by visible guilt as they watched their human classmate being treated like a walking biohazard. The Kavari huddled nearby, feathers still ruffled but curiosity overwhelming their caution. Even the traditionally reserved Herbani had drifted back to observe the proceedings. Lodorax's tail tensed with residual anxiety as he watched the security team reposition themselves around Alex. Their poles still extended, but with slightly less aggressive intent. The professor couldn't shake the feeling that this compromise was merely the eye of the storm, especially given the human propensity for packing the most unusual items in their meals. With the exaggerated care of someone defusing a bomb, Alex slowly opened his lunch container. The assembled crowd, security, students, and one increasingly mortified professor, leaned forward despite themselves. Inside, nestled in what appeared to be a standard human food storage compartment, lay 2 more bananas, their yellow peels pristine and thoroughly non-threatening to anyone who hadn't just witnessed the previous 15 minutes of chaos. The lead security guard's detector swept over them, clicking steadily. 2 additional units of radioactive fruit confirmed, he announced, as if discovering hidden munitions. Anything else in there we should know about? Alex reached into the container and withdrew a spherical object, its skin a deep crimson that caught the corridor's harsh lighting. Just an apple, he said, holding it up with the weary resignation of someone who'd already accepted that nothing would go smoothly today. The detector's clicking changed pitch, shifting from its steady radioactive signature to something altogether more alarming. "Sir," one of the guards said, voice tight with renewed alarm, "I'm reading chemical signatures. Analyzing now." His visor display flickered with data streams, casting pale red shadows across his reptilian features. The guard's scaled hands trembled slightly as he manipulated the controls. "Chief, we've got cryogenic glycosides. The seeds contain compounds that metabolize into hydrogen cyanide. Repeat, actual hydrogen cyanide precursors detected." The reaction was instantaneous. "Cyanide!" shrieked one of the Gorlaks, their green skin immediately shifting to a sickly yellow. "The human brought poison to school?" Dean Vorthak's transparent body showcased a spectacular display of physiological panic. His 3 hearts began beating in entirely different rhythms, creating a chaotic purple light show within his chest cavity. His primary brain actually seemed to dim for a moment before flaring back to life with alarmed phosphorescence. Even his typically hidden spleen made a brief quivering appearance. "This is almost worse than the bananas," wailed a Kavari, feathers molting in distress. "At least radiation takes time. Cyanide is immediate death." The Herbani clutched each other, their scales shifting through a kaleidoscope of alarmed colors. "First, nuclear fruit, now chemical weapons. What kind of monsters eat pure poison for sustenance?" Lodorax felt his professional instincts override his guilt. "Now wait just a moment," he interjected, stepping forward with his hands raised. "The cyanide is only in the seeds, and only if they're crushed. The flesh of the apple is perfectly—" "Professor," the security chief interrupted, "are you telling me this fruit contains actual cyanide? The same compound used in numerous historical assassination attempts across the galaxy?" "Well, yes, but—" "And the human brought it into a classroom full of vulnerable students?" "The seeds would have to be chewed," Lodorax protested, his tail lashing with frustration. "No one accidentally consumes apple seeds, and even if they did, the concentration is so low that—" "Low for a Death Worlder, perhaps," the chief countered. "But what about our more delicate students? What if someone had borrowed a bite? What if the seeds had somehow been compromised?" "No one shares food at the academy," Lodorax argued, grasping at any reasonable argument. "It's literally the first thing in the student handbook. No food sharing between species due to potential allergens and toxins. Every student signs an acknowledgement. It's been standard policy for 2 centuries. The security chief paused, considering this. Around them, the crowd of onlookers had grown. Several faculty members had emerged from nearby classrooms, drawn by the commotion. Lodorak spotted Professor Zepp Hicks from Advanced Mathematics. All 6 of her eye stalks extended in fascination. And Dr. Kralm from the medical wing, who was frantically taking notes on his datapad. "This is a valid point," the chief admitted reluctantly. "The food-sharing protocols are quite strict." He turned back to Alex. "You weren't planning to share any of this, were you?" "No," Alex said emphatically. "I just wanted to eat my lunch, alone, like every other day." After several more minutes of heated debate, during which Lodorak cited many different xenobiology studies on accidental toxin exposure rates, all 0 in controlled academic environments, the security team reached a consensus. "Fine," the chief announced. "The bananas will be placed in radiation-proof containers for further analysis. The apple—" he paused, clearly unhappy with the compromise— "will be vacuum-sealed to prevent any possibility of seed contamination. Are there any other items in your lunchbox we should be aware of?" Alex hesitated, and Lodorak's heart sank. That hesitation spoke volumes. "I have a chocolate bar," the human admitted quietly, producing a small wrapped rectangle from his container. "It's just a snack." The detector didn't just click this time, it practically screamed. The security chief's fingers flew over his datapad, his expression growing increasingly grave behind his visor. "Theobroma cacao," he read aloud, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering a death sentence. "Analyzing. Oh, by the greater nebula." He turned to address the now sizable crowd, his posture shifting to full official mode. "This substance contains theobromine, a methylxanthine alkaloid that is toxic to approximately 94% of known galactic species. It affects the central nervous system, cardiovascular system, and respiratory system. Fatal doses have been recorded at as low as 100 milligrams per kilogram of body weight in some species." He paused, scanning further. "It also contains caffeine, another methylxanthine that compounds the toxicity. Sugar levels at 45%, creating additional metabolic stress for most non-human digestive systems. Fat content includes both cocoa butter and milk solids, each presenting their own xenobiological challenges." "But that's—" one of the Brzix began, then trailed off, their horns dropping. "That's chocolate, the forbidden human brown bars." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled crowd. Even the faculty members who had maintained professional composure throughout the banana and apple revelations took involuntary steps backward. The chief nodded grimly. "Correct. Unlike the previous items, which pose theoretical risks, chocolate is a controlled substance on several worlds. It's been responsible for numerous fatalities among those who couldn't resist trying the ultimate forbidden treat." "I know about this," Professor Zeppix chittered from the crowd, her eye stalks weaving in distress. "My cousin's mate tried a single square at a diplomatic function, spent 3 weeks in intensive care, said it was the most delicious thing they'd ever tasted, even as their respiratory system shut down." Lodorak tried one more time. "But again, if no one is sharing food—" "Professor," the chief said, his tone suggesting his patience had finally run out. "Chocolate is different. It's not just toxic, it's legendarily tempting. There are documented cases of individuals from 12 different species knowingly consuming it despite being fully aware of its lethality. The combination of sugar, fat, and psychoactive compounds creates what xenopsychologists call the ultimate gustatory temptation. Even Earth's domestic companions, their dogs and cats, can't handle it, and they evolved alongside humans." "The forbidden brown bars of Earth," whispered a Gorlak in an awed tone. "My grandfather told stories. Some said smugglers would pay a year's wages for a single brick. There's an entire underground market," another guard added. "Chocolate speakeasies where desperate souls risk everything for just a taste. The humans are the only known species that can consume it without any medical consequences. Them and, inexplicably, the Farduvian slime molds, though no one knows why." Alex looked down at his innocent-looking candy bar with new eyes. I just bought it from a vending machine. It was on sale, 2 for 1. 2 for 1? the dean repeated faintly, his internal organs performing what could only be described as a synchronized cringe. Casual commerce in what 3 systems classify as a biological weapon. The security chief extended a containment box toward Alex. Sir, I'm going to need you to place the chocolate in here. Carefully. We'll need to dispose of it according to hazardous material protocols. Alex's shoulders slumped in defeat. One by one, his lunch items were sealed away. Bananas in radiation-proof containers, apple vacuum-sealed like a museum specimen, and his chocolate bar locked in a box marked with more warning symbols than most laboratories used for their most dangerous experiments. Don't worry, Dean Vorthak said, clearly trying to salvage something from this disaster. The cafeteria can provide you with species-appropriate nutrition. We have a lovely selection of processed protein cubes and filtered water. Great, Alex muttered, looking at his confiscated lunch with undisguised disappointment. Protein cubes. My favorite. As the crowd began to disperse, Lodorax caught sight of several students already manipulating their communication devices. By tomorrow, this incident would be all over the Academy's social networks. By the end of the week, it would probably reach the parents. His first lecture, and he'd caused an interspecies incident involving radioactive fruit, chemical weapons, and controlled substances. His tail dragged on the floor as he made his way back to his office, guilt sitting heavy in his stomach. The human had only wanted to eat lunch, simple, cheap, healthy food from his homeworld, and Lodorax's dramatic flair had turned it into an international incident. 1 month later, Professor Lodorax sat in his office, a space that reflected both his predatory heritage and his academic pursuits. The walls were lined with specimens of various toxic plants from across the galaxy, each sealed in crystal cases with detailed notation cards. His desk, carved from a single piece of Yarosari bloodwood, was cluttered with datapads, scientific journals, and a half-eaten portion of processed protein that passed for his lunch these days. The large window behind him looked out over the Academy's central courtyard, where students of various species mingled between classes. He could see a familiar human figure, Alex, sitting alone on a bench, consuming what appeared to be regulation cafeteria food, with visible lack of enthusiasm. 3 tables away, a group of Gorlaks kept shooting nervous glances at the human, occasionally whispering among themselves. The cafeteria had even instituted a human food safety zone, a ridiculous yellow-taped area where human students could eat their specially imported meals without causing panic. Alex, of course, sat well outside it, resigned to his fate of bland, approved nutrition. Lord Axe turned his attention back to the newspad in his hands, his ears flattening against his skull as he read the headlines for the 100th time. Professor's Nuclear Fruit Lecture sparks Academy panic. Human students' toxic lunch raises questions about Death Worlder integration. Exclusive: the day weaponized produce nearly caused evacuation. The media had latched onto the story with gleeful enthusiasm, each retelling more sensationalized than the last. What had begun as a simple misunderstanding had morphed into a cautionary tale about the dangers of Death Worlder cuisine. Some outlets had even called for separate facilities for human students, citing unacceptable risks to other species. Lord Axe hadn't lost his job. The Academy Board had ultimately decided that his lecture content was technically accurate, if somewhat dramatically presented. But he'd been required to attend 2 different sensitivity training sessions on interspecies communication and 3 workshops on appropriate academic dramatics. The incident had changed him. Gone was the professor who had reveled in theatrical presentations and attention-grabbing exaggerations. In his recent lectures, he presented facts with clinical precision, his delivery as dry as the desert plains of Zirion 6. When discussing the man-eating plants of Allura Prime last week, he'd simply stated their dietary preferences in monotone, complete with statistical probability charts. His students had actually fallen asleep. He glanced at his lesson plan for tomorrow. Carnivorous flora of the acid swamps of Peleus III. In the past, he would have opened with a dramatic reenactment of an unwary traveler's final moments. Now, his notes consisted entirely of chemical formulas and digestive efficiency ratings. A soft chime indicated a message on his personal datapad. He glanced at it with little interest, then did a double take. It was from Alex. "Professor, I wanted to thank you for trying to defend me during the lunch incident. I know the media coverage has been rough. If it helps, I've started a small study group for Death Worlder food safety to help other students understand human cuisine. Would you be interested in guest lecturing? I promise I'll leave the bananas at home. Alex. P.S. Did you know tomatoes are in the nightshade family? I was going to bring a sandwich last week, but thought better of it. Wouldn't want another deadly poison in the classroom headline." Despite himself, Lodorax felt his whiskers twitch in what might have been the ghost of amusement. The human was learning to navigate the minefield of interspecies dietary differences with a sense of humor, perhaps the only sane response to such absurdity. He glanced at his lesson plan again, then at the message, weighing his options. Perhaps there was a middle ground between dry recitation and dramatic exaggeration. Maybe he could find a way to make learning engaging without causing interspecies incidents. He began typing a response, his claws clicking softly on the screen. Outside his window, the Academy continued its daily rhythm, a place where different species learn to coexist despite their vastly different biologies. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Instead of simply replying, he stood and strode toward the door. He would find Alex in the courtyard, not with a datapad message, but with a proposal. The Death Worlder Food Safety Group was a good start, but it was reactive. It was time for something proactive. Together, they would create a new elective, gastronomic diplomacy in practice. It was time to stop just talking about toxic plants and start teaching about cultural context. He had a feeling it would be the most popular and chaotic class at the Academy.